Hello, my little rain clouds. I want to talk about decision making. I think a lot of people are very hesitant to make decisions sometimes. They get trapped in analysis paralysis or choice paralysis, and they are very, very concerned with making the wrong decision and trying their hardest to make the right decision. And so I want to help with that. And the thing is, I don't think that you're bad at making decisions. I think the problem is more about analysing past decisions and not being kind to yourself, as is the case with so many things. See, I don't think that there is a wrong decision and a right decision most of the time. Sometimes there might be a very obvious wrong and right decision, like, hey, do you want to pay a $2 fine or go to jail for 60 years? Well, I'll pay the fine, thanks. If I'm able to, I'll pay the fine. That's a no-brainer, right? And so you're probably not deliberating about that decision. You're not wondering, oh God, should I pay the $2 fine or go to jail for 60 years? You just pay the fine. You can select the obvious answer. But then there are other choices that are a lot harder to make. Like, for instance, if you're trying to figure out what car to buy, there are a lot of different choices and a lot of different variables to analyze, and you are very, very likely to consider yourself to have made the wrong decision when it comes to something like that. And the thing is that I don't think there is a wrong decision. And I don't think that there is a right decision. It's not a black and white binary thing. It doesn't have to be so absolutist. There are lots of possible choices that you can make, and they all have their pros and cons. They all have benefits and drawbacks. And that is why you are deliberating. That is why you're not sure what choice to make. Because they're all kind of good. And all kind of bad. So when you're faced with these kind of decisions and you're beating yourself up and saying, oh, I can't make the wrong decision, I'm so confused and I'm going to second guess myself and all those sorts of things, I think it's helpful to remind yourself, maybe there isn't a wrong decision. Maybe there isn't a right decision. They're all fine. They're all valid. Otherwise I wouldn't be considering them. If I'm trying to buy a car, I'm not thinking about 200,000 different models of car. I've probably narrowed it down to a short list of cars that suit my needs. I've already eliminated all of the wrong choices, all of the things that would obviously not work for me. The only things that are left are possible things where, yeah, I can see some benefits in that. Yeah, those could all be cars that I would like to have. Or, whatever decision you're making. The thing about the wrong decision is that it is a very subjective thing, and it's a realization that you come to, a judgment that you make at a specific point in time, a specific circumstance. Let's say that you're looking at cars, and you've identified a bunch of different ones, and they all have different strengths and weaknesses. So there's a car that's the fastest. There's a car that's the cheapest. There's a car that's the safest. There's a car that's the prettiest. There's a car that has the most storage space. And you're looking at all of these different cars. And let's say that you pick the cheapest car. You might look back at that when you get into a car accident and say, ugh, I made the wrong choice. I should have picked the safest car. Or if you happen to run late for something, you may look back on that and say, oh, I should have picked the fastest car. I made the wrong choice. Or you're trying to fit something into your car and you say, oh, I made the wrong choice. I should have picked the more spacious car. And yet, all of those situations are picking different choices than the ones you made, but they're all different from each other as well. You might consistently wish that you had picked a specific car. So if you're lugging around huge things all the time, then you might have said, oh, I really wish I'd picked the one with the biggest storage space. But realistically, you're probably going to look at all of the options that you had And the more options you had, the worse this gets. You're going to look at all the options you had, and you get to pick and choose all the situations where a different car would have been a better choice. And so if you had the choice of like 1,200 different cars, then you're going to have a lot of different points in your life where you can regret it and say, if only I'd picked number 11,001 or 602, it would have been so much better. Because you have so many more options to choose from and so many more situations where you can look at and go, you know what, a different tool would have been really helpful here. A different set of advantages, a different option would have been great in this situation. And yet, your brain is probably going to discount all of the times where you picked the right car, all of the times where you picked the safest one and narrowly dodged an accident. Or if you happen to pick the cheapest car, then you probably will not pay attention to the fact that you can afford all sorts of nice little things to buy yourself because you didn't spend so much money on that car. It's unfortunately just the way that we kind of assess choices and opportunities that we made. We don't tend to think about the times when we did the right one. Look back at your life, look back at all the choices that you made, and you'll probably realize, actually, there were like a lot of cool things that happened because of the choices I made. But your brain screens them out, and they're kind of tough to see. It's not really obvious most of the time when you have made a good decision because you screen it out. And because you've had so many other options, it's so much easier to see when, if only I'd have picked that option instead, I would have been in a better situation. And I think our brains are skewed towards thinking this way so that we can try and learn from our previous decisions and make better decisions. But I think when we developed that ability, we were in a very different world where there were not so many options. Now we have thousands upon thousands of different options for all sorts of things. If you want to buy a car, there are so many kinds of cars. It's not, do I sleep in a cave or do I sleep in a forest? It's not, do I try and climb this tree for food or do I go hunting for food? Do I pick this one person in my tribe or this other person in my tribe? We have so many options and we are swamped with them. So that when we look back on past decisions, we're not really learning anything. We're just kind of nitpicking. We're just kind of blaming ourselves for not having an incredible amount of foresight. And it's also not fair to us because we can't have picked all of those options in different situations. We can recognize when the fastest car would have been good and when the safest car would have been good, but we can't have picked both of them. And yet, we're unhappy with our choice doubly so because of that. It's not really fair. So we kind of need to catch ourselves when we're thinking this way and say, hold on a minute, Captain Hindsight. I couldn't have picked both of those cars. I couldn't have chosen all of those options. It's not fair to be shitting on my decisions. I made a decision I thought was right in the moment, and it actually has worked for me quite well in all of these situations. Let's not forget all of the times when this choice that I made actually did benefit me. Because if we don't recognize when we've made good decisions, that kind of makes us believe that we're bad at decision making, which then tends to paralyze us even more because we think, I'm incompetent. I don't know how to make decisions. I always make bad decisions. I regret them all the time. I can't make this decision. I'm going to make the wrong decision. So it sort of spirals, and then we get even more paralyzed, and then we tend to doubt our decisions even more, and it just cycles around and makes us miserable and unhappy. The grass is always greener on the other side. We're always looking at options that we didn't take. We're looking at different situations and thinking, wow, they're so much better than ours. When realistically, I think we tend to ignore the good things in our own situation. We tend to focus on the good things in other situations, other hypotheticals, other choices, other people's situations. And we tend to downplay the negatives of those because they're not real. they're not actually happening. So the negatives that we might be facing in those hypotheticals, they're not affecting us that much. So we don't really care. If we think, oh man, if I'd only taken the faster car, I'd be able to get to places so much faster. We don't tend to think, would have had to pay a lot more money for it though. And actually it would have been probably a lot more expensive to run. And so I'd be like not making as much money every month, which means that I couldn't buy those nice things that I like. And I wouldn't be able to afford this and that and the other thing. We don't think about that. It's just a small little moment, a little fantasy of, oh man, I could get places so much faster if I picked the fast car. So we need to kind of recognize when we're thinking that way and challenge that way of thinking and say, no, actually, there are some pretty good things about the decision I ended up making. And yeah, I kind of wish that I'd chosen other things in some situations. But overall, I made a pretty decent decision. I did what I thought was best. Maybe I've learned some things since then. Maybe if I were to make the same decision again, I would choose differently. But I can't undo what I did. I can't go back in time. When I next buy a car in the future, then maybe I can take these lessons under advisement. But there's actually some pretty nice things about the decisions that I made. I'm actually not so bad at this whole decision-making thing. I think it's rare that we make really bad decisions. Sometimes we might have a lapse in judgment. Maybe we're not thinking clearly, or we're just not really caring about the consequences. We're being reckless or willfully ignorant or something like that. But I think realistically, that doesn't happen that much. Most of the time, I think we make the best decision we can given what we know in the moment. It's never going to be a perfect decision. We're never going to know everything that there is to know. We're never going to be able to mathematically compute the best outcome or the best choice. But we do what we think is going to be right. And, we learn and we grow from that experience. So it's not really fair to tell yourself that you're bad at decision making, because you're not. You're doing what you can. And sure, sometimes you might actually have made a pretty big error and there might be a lesson to learn. But I think that if that is the case, you'll probably be pretty aware of it. Those kinds of things tend to be pretty obvious. And so they're kind of the no-brainer things. Even if in the moment they seemed fine, afterwards you realize, oh yeah, that was actually not a good thing to do and I won't do that again. But most of the decisions that we beat ourselves up for are these kinds of decisions where we're just presented with lots of different options and we struggle to determine the right and the wrong one. And I think that realistically, that's just an unfair way of thinking. We're just thinking in a very rigid black and white kind of way. It's not the decision making that's the problem. It's just the way that we assess those decisions. And we beat ourselves up and blame ourselves for not having perfect foresight. But it's a rigged game because we can't have chosen the best option for every single circumstance we will ever encounter. You can't buy a car that's the best at everything. Or if you do, I guess it's going to be like super expensive, in which case it's not the best at being affordable. You may want to make a list of the traits or qualities or criteria that you find to be the most important, the most valuable to you. And so you use that to make your decision. Oh, safety is really important to me. I've got a family and I want to make sure that they're going to be safe. So I'm going to pick the safest car, even if it's not as fast or not as cheap or not as roomy as the other cars. Or, I really need to carry around like loads of luggage and stuff. So I'm going to pick the one with the best storage space. That's the most important to me, even if I have to pay more for it. Those kinds of things are helpful to factor into your decision making so that you can make a choice that suits you the best based on what you think you need, based on the situations that you imagine you'll be getting into. But you don't know what the future holds. None of us do. So we can't make a perfect decision every time. Arguably, we can't make a perfect decision any of the time. Basically, don't beat yourself up for things that you chose. If there's a lesson, learn that lesson and then carry it on for the next time you make that kind of decision. But ask yourself, was that really the wrong decision? Have there been any situations where that was beneficial? Am I maybe just glossing over them, forgetting them, screening them out? Because probably you made a fine decision. And there were plenty of good things that came from the choice that you made. And the other options might have been really nice in other ways, sure. But then you would have missed out on the stuff that you did have, the cool things that came from the choice you did make. So be fair when you're assessing your own choices, and remind yourself of all the times where actually you made a good decision, or at least an adequate one, an okay decision. You're better at this than you think you are. Remember that. Until next time, my little rain clouds. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.